tension to the wine.
That's the phenolic tension. Yeah, that's exactly the right words. Because I sat there and mumbled my way through it with the Sadie's, and he was being very polite, but I really didn't know how to describe it. So
no, well, it's actually because you haven't seen those sort of concepts before. That's what's so exciting about it. It's new,
yeah,
and certainly the amber has given us more depth in our other wines as well. The other Sauvignon Blanc Semillons are having up to 8 days skin contact time, and they're dry white table wines. They're not ambers, because we do have such beautiful quality tannins in the skins of the white wines, and as well as the red. So it's like they're ripe, they're fine, and so you can really at that word phenolic tension and depth of flavour. Whether you leave it with low sulfur so it goes orange, or you leave it for a longer period of time so it is an orange wine or an amber wine, or whether you choose to take it off skins earlier. I mean, we just made and released this year a legacy Sauvignon Blanc, which has had 8 days on skins, and it's a beautiful wine, but we wouldn't have made that without the I suppose the experimentation of the amber, and the knowledge that we So the amber is the longest skin contact, and then the other wines are all getting at least overnight skin contact now. So we can get some of that sort of building some of that interest in the wine, a really beautiful sort of texture.
Oh, we're on 7 o'clock, so let's kick off and get going. Vanya, thanks so much for joining us yet again, and Kelvin from Haichu for making this happen. It's become a watermark. We've got to a situation with our online tastings where we actually don't have enough Thursdays in the year anymore. But when I sat down at the beginning of this year to figure out who I really, really wanted, you really came up at the top of the list. So I'm so pleased that you could make yourself available, and also to make some stock available for our database tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I thought I'd just ask everybody to, let me just mute whoever's talking. Who's talking? No, they've gone away. Maybe we'll look at the two whites side by side, Vanya, because they are so remarkably different. Also, I guess we're in a situation with the 18, the Dancing in the Sun is the white field blend, well, not a field blend, white blend, and the ambers and SBS. So maybe we could kick off there and compare the two side by side.
Yeah, it's a really interesting comparison, and it sort of is, you have a white wine which is made like a white wine, traditionally and conventionally, i.e. the blend isn't traditional with this Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon and Verdelho, but the it's harvested around, of course, the biodynamic calendar, as all of our wines are hand harvested around the biodynamic calendar, kicking off into our 50th year this year as well, which is really nice to be grateful for all those people and times that we've shared to get to the point of making these wines. I also like to acknowledge the Wadandi people, the traditional custodians of this land where the wines are made, before, with respect, elders past, present and future. Because the land really is what makes the wine. We are in Wilyabrup sub-region of Margaret River, and these two, I think, are classic styles of the region. The Dancing in the Sun, made with short skin contact time, brought into the winery after harvesting on the fruit and flower days, crushed, pressed, and put into tank, a little bit into barrel. Whereas the amber is it's a different vintage. I think it's nice to look at the different vintages as well. The 18 was a vintage of great power and poise, and the 17 was a vintage where we had a really beautiful minerality and acidity in the wine. So the amber wine is a white wine, Sauvignon Blanc, that's made like a red wine, in that it has skin contact time primarily, and also less sulfur dioxide. So all of our wines we consider to be natural wines because we don't use chemicals in the vineyard. Obviously, we're a certified biodynamic and now carbon positive property, where our soils are sequestering more carbon than our whole business emits, which is a wonderful thing for climate change.
Does the Australian government give you credit for that?
No, we're actually doing a study now to be able to look at carbon trading, but it's at the very beginning. So no, not at the moment. We've got $100,000 worth of carbon credits out there we can't do anything with, but we're hoping to change that at some stage. So they're two really interesting wines. If you look at the Dancing in the Sun, you'll see all that beautiful, floral aromatics, the little bit of the, the nettly character from the Sauvignon Blanc. You've got the tropical fruits and the spice from the Verdeo. And in the Amber, I always love this wine because it has such a Negroni sort of character, and as it gets older it gets more of a Negroni character, and that sort of orange character of the wine gets deeper. And quite frankly, when we first made this wine in 2014, it was a very different style of wine. It was a 15% alcohol. It was, a huge Semillon Sauvignon Blanc sort of wine that we gave a lot of new oak to as well, to try and make sure that it was stable. It still is very stable. But then when we moved into 2017, we made a wine which is 12.3% alcohol. It's made from, 100% Sauvignon Blanc from Cullen Vineyard. And it really, I think, was a bit of a surprise. But because of the nature of, amber wines or orange wines, they do, they probably reflect the vintage more than any other wine that we make. And so they're very, very fine. Like that was the character of the 17 vintage, was that, that beautiful sort of finesse and elegance. And I find this wine has, whereas the Dancing in the Sun is, it's a beautiful drink. You sit in the sun and you drink and you enjoy all the characters about it. There's nothing really that's going to make you go, what's that, or do I like it or not? It's just a very enjoyable wine that everyone, it's very popular for us. So whereas the Amber divides the room, and people go, I don't like that at all, but it always makes people think and stop. And in fact, I think this wine was one of the Master of Wine exam wines, because it is so unusual.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really nice pair to sit next to each other. The expressiveness of the amber wine I love, because it is a different expression of the grape variety, and how they will age, we don't really know. We just want to make a wine which is a nice wine to drink, and really has those different qualities of Sauvignon Blanc. I've always personally felt is a little bit unfair, because with red wines you accept all the skins and the pips and everything, and you put them all together, whereas white wines you almost like say, oh, I don't like the skins and the pips. And in actual fact, because of our biodynamic practice, we have very physiological ripeness in the skins, and so you can do that skin contact time, and it's a lot of fun. And the amphora component of the amber wine is really nice. It gives it a nice sort of, we were talking about earlier about the phenolic tension, and I think that's a really great word. And we've learned a lot about Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon styles in terms of skin contact and amphora, in terms of making them have that little bit more a texture and phenolic tension in the wine. So it's a really interesting wine styles to compare against one another.
Well, I think it's even more. I mean, I've always had a very big soft spot for 17 Margaret River, yours and the Mugfords in particular. And I can see that style, that quality showing through. So the wines are clearly very different from each other, but you know what, Vanya, there's also something that binds them. You can see they're from the same family in terms of their purity of spirits. There's something that's very clean and clear and defined about both, that in some ways links them, despite the fact that they're 180 in style and varietal and vintage. So yeah, it's a really cool thing. I'm just, my mind's racing with this orange. I'm a bit of an orange wine virgin, because I've been fed endless buckets of the Eastern European stuff. And as we were talking about earlier, that the hipsters are churning out in garages in Serbia and Bosnia and calling orange wine, and everyone thinks it's cool, and it's got a politically activated label on it, and they're charging all this sort of money. So I've had a bit of a downer on it. And then Robert Parker wrote something about, I think it was about 2 years ago, where he was really against the notion of natural wines. And he wrote a huge essay on it. So it's terrific now to see what an orange wine can do when it's carefully made in a considered way. In terms of food, I was thinking of foie would be amazing with the amber. I just think that the richness in that orange and that grapefruit thing, the Campari grapefruit flavors that I'm getting would be amazing with that sort of food. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, you can actually, that's the interesting thing about it. You can actually pair it with most things because it's got the qualities of both red and white wine. And so, you know, and it's that I took a particular liking to drinking it during the autumn because it was just that sort of wine. It was kind of crossing in between summer and winter. But, you know, seafood, abalone, chicken, it really, and pork, we had when it's you know, it can really cross a lot of different territories. But I think that's a great suggestion. I hadn't thought of that, but you know, antipasto platter, you know, it just really can carry quite a lot of complexity in food as well, because it's quite a complex wine, and that phenolic tension and acidity will help with all of that food matching as well. So, you know, what we found in the restaurant was that, you know, the amber was being matched with everything. And we're going, well, you know, so, yeah, I mean, I think it's been, you know, I think it's a really good point to make that there's some really horrible orange wine out there. That's, you know, people make you feel like you should like it, but it's just faulty. And so, but I think that the different expression of the, you know, if you've got, it's more sensitive to fruit quality than any other grape variety, because with red wines you have, you know, you have thicker skins, and so white wines have thin skins, and so it's more about making sure that you get the quality of fruit, and then making the wine from that. So I think it's just a wine which will evolve. Not everyone has success with their style, and it takes us, you know, it's quite an exciting wine to make for us. But we've sort of worked out that the best quality, the most interesting style. I mean, I wouldn't mind making all amber wine, but there is the occasion when you feel like a, you know, bright, crisp, fresh SBS, you know. So, but you know, with our grafted Sauvignon Blanc vines, you know, they're grafted on Cabernet Sauvignon. So not only is it a crossover in style between the you know, the way that you're making it in the winery, but also it's a you know, it's a blend in the vineyard. So that's really been a really exciting, because those characters that you get a different type of bunch on those fruit. They're more like a, you know, Cabernet bunch, and the smaller berries, and so you get all of these Cabernet-like characters in a white grape because they're grafted, because they take on part of the personality. So it's always, you know, you like to think of the qualities are part of the vineyard first and foremost, and then, you know, we're just the curators in the cellar.
Well, what sets the amber apart for me from everything else that I've tasted in the orange wine category so far, and I'm happy to taste more, what sets this one apart is the cleanness of it. There's just a sweeping, clean, clear kind of construct to it that really it's the thing that was missing from all my other experiences. I have a friend on watching tonight from Vienna, and she's dragged me through endless bars in Europe, because she's completely obsessed with orange wines, and I'm yet to find one that I like. So this was a particular revelation for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, and the other thing is that they say with orange wines that you shouldn't drink them until after a year, because they take that amount of time to, once they've been put in the bottle, it takes a year before they actually come together. So you know, I think this one's a lovely wine to look at, because you do have that bottle age, which they talk about is so essential. And you know, the more I see these wines as they age, the better they get, and the more interesting they get. And you know, they're I think that word interest and, you know, and that making people think is a great thing, as long as the wine, as you say, tastes good. So, yeah.
We have a restaurant in Singapore called Knox, which is all light is removed in the restaurant. And the whole notion is to eat blind to increase the taste of your palate. And back in the old days when our ancestors flew in metal tubes in the air, I used to take people to that restaurant because from a wine tasting point of view, it really sharpens the palate. And I would love to pour this amber, but pour it in the context of confusing people as to whether it's red or white. Because I'm completely convinced if you took the light away, you would really start to wonder somewhere into the south of France somewhere for a red wine. There's a number of options that rabbit holes I would go down to try and work out what that wine is. So really interesting. Thank you.
Well, that's right, and because it does have that phenolic structure and the acidity, so it is very European in that character. And also, we don't add anything to our wine, so we don't add any tannins or acid or yeast or. Yeah. So it is very, I suppose, European style wine in that way, but also, you know, quintessentially Willie Abrupts Margaret River, because it's completely pure and from the land. Yeah.
Before we jump into the reds, there's a question from Wallong. The blend percentage of grapes in the dancing versus the amber. Do you have the actual split of percentages?
Yeah, so they are different in composition too. The dancing. The amber is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. The dancing is 54% Semillon, 47% Sauvignon Blanc, and 3% Verdelho, I think. It was. Yeah, so it's really a completely different blend as well. So you've not only got a different vintage, different style of winemaking, but you have a different blend. And the dancing series are sort of like, I suppose, just they're, as the name suggests, they're sort of a wine to enjoy the dance of life, we always say. Yeah. So it's very cool. But I think, it really the dancing has no oak. That little has a label on the front, which is just a vine, as an etching of a vine, a twig with a little bit of leaf in springtime, and it's called Spring, the etching, which is done by Ashley Jones, who's a local artist. Ashley does all of our artwork for us, and so it really is, you know, a wine that is about the fruit of the wine, you know, and I think that's really very special to have that aspect of, you know, so purely. I mean, really, you know, it's hard to describe. We have people come to work harvest at our place, and they say, "Oh, you know, we wish we'd come to your place after we'd worked at other places because we didn't realize what it was that you didn't do." And so, you know, people think you harvest a grape on the fruit and flower days, you bring them to the winery, you press them, crush them, and then, you know, they make themselves, and that's really the story. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in making all those decisions and that risk taking. So yeah, I think it's something that, you know, yeah. Whereas the amber has had time in new oak, so it's a little bit 20% new oak, so it's had a little bit more. We thought we'd just give it a little bit of oak just to sort of balance those tannins that came from the. But not a lot. It's not, you wouldn't say this is wine.
There's no overt sensation of oak.
No. It's more of a salt and peppering, and most of the oak was older oak. So there is a lot of differences in those wines, aside from the varietal composition and the vintage. But I love that difference. And people always say, you know, there's so much of a tag put on Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon blends, that they're all the same, and they're really not. I mean, they're really can be very different. Yeah, if they're made from quality fruit that's you know, handled in a way which is expressive to the place. Yeah.
All right, so let's look at these three reds. Again, quite different, starting with the Mangan, then heading into the Cab Sauv Merlot, and finishing with the Dinah Madeline. I was hoping, Vanya, you could just sketch out for us, because there's a lot of repeat customers who were with us last year. If you could compare the 18 vintage for Cullen versus the 19, that would be a really good place to kick it off.
Yeah, I think it's You see in our wines, you really see the vintage differences because we don't add anything to correct for it. So I think if we were to say, I was saying earlier that the 19 vintage was the frost vintage, we barely had any Chardonnay at all. And then we had, because it was dry everywhere else, we had really bad, if we were picking under the nets in 2019, and lower yields than 18. 18 is, obviously considered a classic vintage in Margaret River. And in Willie Abrup, it's a vintage of great balance and poise. We had a cooler ripening season and then heat, so we had very good flowering and set and classic conditions for ripeness. And I think that you will find not only in Cullens but across the region, you'll find great consistency of quality. 2019, on the other hand, I love this vintage for the aromatics in the wines. It's the most aromatic and elegant and perfume vintage that we've had for a long while. And every single wine of ours, you'll see that. A lot of people have commented, how amazing the colour of our wines in 19 is and how incredibly rich and dense and complex and aromatic. And I, with the lower yields and those issues that we had with frost, that didn't affect the red grape variety. It was more the white, but we still didn't have big yields. I think you'll see in all of these wines, you'll see that character of the 19 vintage, which is so beautifully perfumed and elegant and very fine tannins. We had terrific physiological ripeness in 2019, and you see that once again, that depth of flavor with that perfume without necessarily the hugeness that you see in the 18 vintage.
I would say that phenolics on all three of these are giving up a subtlety that wasn't immediately relevant at the same stage last year in the 18s.
That's right.
Something a bit more sculptured and poised about them, which is great. The other thing that I'm taking right off the top, and admittedly, Mangan's a totally different kettle of fish to the other two, but purple fruit and violets, and in the Cabernet black squid ink, I'm definitely getting those kinds of notions. The Cabernet in 4 and 5, my gosh, the tannic structure is just faultless. It's just rippling and smooth and silky. But before we get to 4 and 5, let's talk about the Mangan, because I don't think we've had the opportunity to sell it for a couple of vintages. So I'm looking forward to doing it this time.
Yeah, and we didn't make much of this one either. But yeah, I think this one is incredibly sort of perfumed, and the thing about the 19 vintage too is the sense of, as you were saying, completeness with the very fine tannins. And I think red wine quality does wrap around the quality of the tannins. It's a predominantly Malbec. And has Petit Verdot. The East Block, we used to make a Malbec Petit Verdot Merlot blend, but we now, we feel that Malbec is really, a rising star in the region. Yep. And, it produces well every year. It makes a very wine of a great sort of opulence and richness and excitement. Yeah. And so, the 81% Malbec in this wine gives that scale and that beautiful, they're like Semillon grapes. They're sort of, you have to crush them. You can't berry sort because they just, go all slushy. But, within a sort of, a day in the tank, they picked up this incredible colour. And I liken them to being like, they look like the Semillon, but they behave like in a textural and character sense like Sauvignon Blanc. Oh, that's interesting. And the Petit Verdot on the other, and the Petit Verdot on the other hand is really, really tiny little berries. And of course, Petit Verdot traditionally in France is, Bordeaux is... the grape variety that only grows in great vintages, and we get it ripe every year in where we are, and the tiny little berries. The vines actually look like weeds. They're terrible, but they make these incredibly concentrated little berries for fruit, and it's like it's a perfect match with that very high acidity and low pH for the Malbec, which tends to be the opposite in a way. It has, higher pH and lower acidity. So they're kind of made in heaven for each other.
It's really interesting.
It's two great varieties.
I think of all the other examples.
Yeah, and
sorry, interrupting you. Sorry.
Was that? No. I was just thinking it's got 5 months in French oak and 40% new. So we're really looking at not a lot of oak with all of our reds. We're looking at the oak is sort of like a salt and peppering effect, and we want the wine and the fruit tannins to shine through. Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking back to other examples of Verdot in Australia where a far lower ratio of it is used, and it has a far more dominating effect in the final product. So it's super. What for me, my takeaway here with the Mangan is that the quality of the Verdot that you're producing is of such a high degree that it interlaces with the opulence of the Malbec, but doesn't overwhelm it. And there's so many other instances of Verdot really being the ugly duckling in Australian red blends. And this is, normally they would never go as far as 18%. It's a large percentage to use. Normally they're playing around in the 3s and the 5s, but the quality is just that good. It's a really great example.
Yeah, the yields are almost terrifyingly low in some areas of the Mangan vineyard for Petit Verdot. But in other areas they're bigger. They do tend to sort of throw a but it's true. I think it is a region which John Gladstone's, who I sort of see as the father of the region, always said that Petit Verdot was the variety that would do very well. And I think Petit Verdot and Malbec are two varieties that people are using a lot in their Cabernet blends now. It's interesting to see that, and it is very much in the vineyard. The Malbec is always gorgeous. You're right, the Petit Verdot is always sometimes more of a problem in terms of the tannins, just because the berries are so small. And you've got that very powerful experience of tannin and acid and pH and everything. It's like, whoa,
get that green Madagascar peppercorn thing, and as it gets older and older, and as it ages in the bottle, it just dominates, just becomes the ugly duckling in the blend. There's some questions about the Mangan blend. I believe it's 81% Malbec and the rest Petit Verdot.
That's right. Correct. Yeah.
So moving on now to two Cabernet, one Merlot blend, and I think there's a little Merlot in the Madeline as well, isn't there?
Yes, there is. So the blend of the Cabernet of Madeline is 87% Cabernet Sauvignon, 7% Merlot, 1% Cabernet Franc, 2% Malbec, and 1% Petit Verdot. So it's the full blend, whereas the Cabernet Merlot is 62% Cabernet Sauvignon, 30% Merlot, and 1% Cabernet Franc.
Right.
So the Cabernet Merlot is sort of like the junior Madeline. And we make, the blend is done in the vineyard, but also on the table. So the Cabernet Merlot, it's great seeing these next to each other. The Cabernet Merlot is actually, I suppose, the second selection of the wine that didn't make the Madeline. So it has all the old vine Cabernet Sauvignon from Cullen. But the Madeline has the the best selection from that vineyard. But we were talking earlier too about the bottle, and we've got this new bottle and new package for the Madeline, which we're gradually upgrading all of our labels with new artwork from Ashley Jones. When we did the Oak Leaf and Acorn label in the 1980s, it was interesting. We couldn't get the technology wasn't there to get the quality of label that we wanted. And it's just only recently that we've been able to get that quality on the bottles in the Vanya and the Legacy series. And then so we've decided to upgrade the Madeline, actually all the bottles as well, because we've got this wonderful graphic designer who can organize and do all these things for us. And we feel it's time in our 50th to have all those upgrades. So the 18 Dinah Madeline was the first one of those. And the Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot will be done in the 2020 vintage. It's a very lovely different etching.
Because I'm the kind of kid that always eats the dessert on the plane before the rest of the food on the tray, I went to the 19 Dinah Madeline very, very early on tonight. And the thing that really struck me immediately, having been lucky enough to taste the 18 last night, is there's definitely an elevated sense of integration and balance. For me, the texture is flowing and silky, and I just wish there'd been a little of the 18 left from last night to put it side by side. But I'm certainly leaning into this as a favoured year from the 18, certainly. It's the texture that really grabs me, Vanya, and the sense of sort of effortless integration that's in a wine that's this young. It's unusual to find that quality at this stage.
Excuse me. Yes, everything that you say is correct. I think that was always the hallmark of the 19, was that completeness and that perfume and that soft tannins. And it by no means means that, excuse me.
That's okay. I'll waffle on.
It's annoying. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean the wine won't age, because it has that fruit density. And that's what we're learning about our wines now, is that ripe tannins makes the wine an incredibly beautiful drink right now.
Yeah.
And, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to age. If you compare the Cab Merlot with the Dinah Madeline, that's one of the things that you'll notice is the difference in, tannin quality. I think, the softness and the silkiness and the sleekness of the 19 Dinah Madeline. I find it to be a very alluring, seductive wine. And, you don't normally think of Cabernet Sauvignon as being that, as being perfumed. And I love the way that, even though it is very complete, you can see the detail in it all. And someone says to you, "Oh, do you want a Cabernet Sauvignon?" You usually think, "Oh my God, that's going to be huge, big, alcoholic, heavy tanning." But these wines are very fine and pretty and elegant. And having the full spread of the blend in the wines, I think it really also adds to that sense of completeness. And that's another word that I would use for biodynamics, is that, the wines are complete. And that completeness comes from, adding and not really making any additions either. So the harvesting around the lunar calendar, the Scott Henry trellising, which I did my Roseworthy project with that. And, it really is sort of honing in on, the health of the vines with the biodynamics, and then getting the physiological ripeness, having the berry exposure. We've done a lot of work out there on Cabernet, well, with everything really, but particularly with Cabernet. And now we have the extra sort of component of amphora as well, a little bit of amphora, which is giving us a different tannin texture. So I feel like, there's a lot of things coming together in these wines now, which are making them, they're really stepping up to a whole nother level of quality.
Yeah. There's just an incredible finish. Lou's asking about Stelvin enclosures. You're 100% Stelvin now?
Yeah.
Okay.
We do have some 3-litre bottles which are under cork.
Right.
But yes, I think, there's just no doubt about, because we've had all these 50s tastings and looked at back vintages of wines, and the whole influence and tragedy of cork is something which we, I know that there's other companies that don't agree with us, but if we could have had, a lot of our, particularly our white wines under screw cap and not cork, we would have had a much more complete tasting and not had to throw out so much wine. But yeah, I think the blend is really a wine which makes us all feel Mum loved the blend. She brought the first Merlot and Cabernet Franc cuttings into the region, and I think it's always wonderful to have this wine, which she I always think of her and how much she loved red wine and the blend. So, it's great. It's really,
no
really
better
good.
tribute. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and the bottle also, not just the label, but the bottle is also a brown bottle. So it's gone a bit retro in a really nice way, and I think I love brown bottles. I think they look, particularly with reds, they're just fantastic,
Well, I was doing the decanting today. There's a restaurant that we use for licensing and health and safety purposes for the decanting. And the restaurant manager took a look at the brown bottles with the amber and with the Madeline. Said, "Oh, I'll have those."
Oh, did he?
Yeah. So, Mason's restaurant's got Cullen's water bottles for perpetuity.
But it is interesting, and how that to keep the classicness of the brand and the label and things, but also to make them so that they're I suppose just having an upgrade every now and then. And I feel too that the whole age of the vine, they're now 50 years old. These vines were planted in 1971, and so they're all planted on their own roots. They're old vines, and even in Bordeaux standards, and we have 8 different sort of clones on our property. There's so many things which are contributing to this whole place where these wines are now. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And that we don't add anything to the wines. I mean, a lot of wines in Australia have added tannic acid, concentrated, back added. These wines are just really completely pure expressions of the land, and I think they're quite unique, and it's a real pleasure to be able, and a blessing, and I'm very grateful to be able to be talking to you people about them tonight, but also to be in that position to.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sense from you that being a 50-year-old winery, but things have never looked better, and there's change and improvement, and it's a super exciting time for Cullen. I think that's really amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is, and you've got the styles of the conventional Diana Madeleines, and then you've got the we call them our supernatural ones, like the amber, which are different, but they're quality wines. And I suppose quality is the word that we use for is our first word in our philosophy statement. So we can't go out and make a wine which we feel isn't that good. So. Yeah, I think it is a really interesting time to be in. I mean, 20 years ago, you wouldn't be able to do that.
You'd be paying people to take the wine.
That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, it was interesting because in the 1980s and 90s, I was interested in skin fermented white wine and sort of made some, and they were just small batches, so we blend them away, but they never really did very well. And it's only really been with the emergence of orange wines that through rootstock and things that they've become back into fashion, and it's great. It's really good because it's given a whole range of diversity within the Australian wine industry that wasn't there before.
Maybe I've got something to thank the hipsters for, other than and ironic expressions. They have contributed in their way.
yeah, that's right. Because I mean, it's the oldest wine style in the world.
Yes,
really,
exactly.
It's it is hipster, but it's like incredibly how the most natural way that you can make those wines.
Yeah, exactly. Any more questions from everybody before we go? Oh, Lou's got a question on rootstock. Has there been any sign of that horrible P letter word anywhere in the region?
No, not that I know of. No.
Okay. Long may it last.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else before we go?
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you so much.
Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Vanya. I hope the weather warms up for you soon in Margaret River.
I know. I'm sitting here without air conditioning in my puffer jacket with the fire on. Thank you so much.
Most welcome. It's been a wonderful time. Thank you, and good night.
Okay. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Let me try and figure out how to switch the recording off.